Hello. So let's get started. Before I share my screen with you guys, hello, my name is Pradilla. My background, I'm an engineer by degree. Ended up specializing in human factors and process optimization because I am fascinated between the gap between the development of technology and the development of human beings, right? As I start going deep into engineering, I realized that we in the caves, in the labs, were developing technology at a speed way faster than people out there. Our ideal customer, was able to pick up with technology, right? So those gaps were very cost efficient for sure, but they were not creating the best experiences for the end of user customer. So that's where I took a deeper dive into human development and psychology to understand how can we create solutions oriented to empower individuals and help humans thrive, because at the end, after behind every solution, behind every product or every service, there is a human being. So I am an advocate for human connection, and I pride myself of developing solutions that are human oriented to empower individuals and not the other way around. So that's a little bit of my background. I've had the opportunity to work throughout numerous startups, venture capital projects, the fintech world, some leading digital banks in Latin America. So I've definitely been able to scoop some experience throughout different industries. And I am more than happy to share with you some of that if there are particular questions. So let's dive into the presentation. I kept it very simple and practical so that we can leave room to dive deep into practical questions that may help you in a particular industry. So that being said, let's jump right into product design and architecture. Like I said, and this is going to be my last line as well, so spoiler alert, it all comes down to customer satisfaction when we are creating products and or solutions, right? Sometimes we get very fixated on competitors, we get distracted with what's happening outside of us, but it's really important to come back to our end customer, our user. And if you have the capacity to put yourself in the shoes of your customer and develop and design solutions from there, your outcome is going to amaze you. It sounds very simple, but we usually end up working behind a desk for somebody else out there, and we forget how the real experience in the real world is going to be when our product or our solution is out there in the market. So with that is the impact of good architecture to keep our products and solutions sustainable. So let's jump right in. I'm going to divide this presentation into sections: product design and architecture. So when we start with product design, it's very important to have it, to understand your product is a packaged solution. It's something that you conceive necessary for people out there and that they are going to need. So the most important thing when you are designing a product or a solution is to understand your customer's needs in very simple terms. Sometimes, and I do love this image because it says more than 1,000 words, we start thinking of our end product maybe down the line in 5 to 10 years, what could it be? And that's very important to have as a vision and a North Star, but do not forget what's the basic need of your user. And to keep it very simple when it comes to solutions, your solution fills in the gap from A to B. Your user is in a current state or your client or whatever, and their ideal state is B. How are you going to get them there? You filling in the gap is your product or your service. So if they want to get from A to B, what is the minimum viable way that you can get them there? How can you solve their problem right away? And then on the way, your customer will point at you what they need as features or add-ons, and then you can start evolving. Again, just highlighting the image, we start with, a skateboard and we get them there. And then down the line, as we get to know our customer and simplify our offering, we can start adding features. And I'm going to use the best example that we all know, which is Uber. I find their model and their use case brilliant. They understood there was a gap. There's people that have cars and there's people that need a ride. Okay, I'm going to match them. I'm going to create a platform that meets a demand and a need. Initially, there was just one car. We all wish there were many features. Down the line, they started offering more and more features and forms of payment and et cetera, et cetera. But what we wanted to focus on when they were designing their product or their service, it was basically, how do I connect this person with this person? Down from there, it's been almost like a decade that they've been developing and furthering out their product. So having that in mind is very important, because sometimes we get carried away and we want to have that last end product, and we may miss a lot of steps on the way that would give us more understanding of our customer. So how do we approach solution design? Breaking down the problem. Again, sometimes we start with the bigger scope, which is amazing, but make sure to break it down into simple terms. What is it that you're trying to solve? And currently try to understand how are people working out without your solution, right? Maybe what's out there is not ideal, or maybe your solution doesn't even exist yet, but it's very important for you to really take the time to understand your ideal niche and your customer, so that you can break down the problem and understand how can you start serving your clients and your customers right away. The more you connect with your customer, the more you can understand what is it that they need. Sometimes customers are shouting at us and they're telling us what we need, but we're behind a desk with a crystal ball trying to figure out what's the next step. So again, it's very important to understand how's the market currently operating without your solution, and why is your solution either unique, very different, or disruptive? Is it simpler than the competition? It is higher scale. It is very important for you to know how is your solution or your product going to differentiate from the rest, because again, that's your North Star. When the noise comes out, or when there's a lot of competitors, or when there's sometimes uncertainty, if you're very clear on what you're trying to solve, nothing's going to distract you from your track. So that is very, very important, very clear objectives. And from there, that's how we jump into the next slide. So keeping it simple. And I love this quote. It's, if you can't explain your solution simply, you don't understand it well enough. And that's what drove me into understanding a little bit of the science and the methodology of solution design, because sometimes we put it out there and we're like, oh, people don't like it, or people are not understanding it. It's not up for people to understand our products and solutions. It's up to us to do our homework as designers, our developers, architects, engineers, to create simple oriented solutions that our customers can pick up on the way. I always joke around and I say, neither of the social platforms out there have manuals. Nobody downloaded a manual on how to use social media. Of course, we can train and we can watch YouTube videos to become better at using them. But the idea of these platforms they are so intuitive and so seamless that people can just pick them up on the way. So that's going to be a very big differentiator between you keeping clients or having a very high rotation every month, because people come in, they try your product, they try your solution, they don't really get it or they don't understand it fully, and then they move on. So it's super important that you're very clear on your concept. That is going to be, just like it says there, it's going to bring you out a clear solution. And if you're able to translate that into the least amount of steps for your customer, you're going to be able to retain them way more. And that's something that I learned out in the industry. We had some of the best engineers developing solutions that nobody understood. So it didn't matter if it was scientifically correct. It didn't matter if it had 3 years of research behind the scenes. If the user doesn't get it, if your client doesn't grab it and go, it's not functional, right? And we are going into a very interesting era where people are looking for simplicity and practicality. There's an overload of information every day, and our attention is being fragmented on a regular basis. So if you're able to provide solutions that are very clear, that are practically oriented, it's going to be, I can tell you that is one of the most groundbreaking approaches that you can take, because your customer is going to come back to you, right? We always stick with what works and what is practical for us. If we have to put too much time to understand solutions, we're more prone to dropping them or doing it later. And my goal for this is to keep it very open, because when I'm talking about solutions, or product design, it could either be a physical product, like electronic appliances or even furniture, or it could be a digital platform or some sort of user digital experience or oriented to technology. The bottom line is, whatever you're trying to solve, keep it simple, be able to understand your real customer needs, not what we think they need, but really get your hands in action, right? get outside of your desk and really engage with your customers, because at the end, customer satisfaction is, in my opinion, one of the biggest determinants of the success of a business. So if you do your homework and you keep it simple for your customers, they will not only appreciate it a lot, but they will keep coming back, and that will almost guarantee word of mouth, which is one of the most powerful ways to grow and expand a business. From there, we jump into architecture. So we're very clear on how we're approaching the problem, on understanding what is it that we want to solve, and how to design a product accordingly. Now the fun part comes in, execution, and how we implement that design, or that the product design. And architecture is fascinating, and it's not just with infrastructure and houses. Architecture is now a whole universe of its own when it comes to the development world, whether it's technology or even in other industries. There's always the blueprints. So what I mean with architecture is your blueprint is a roadmap to align expectations. And I love this, maybe I will zoom in a little bit. I love, this is from way back in the 70s, and there's a lot of variations from this image, but I think it's so accurate how within the same theme, we all think we understand what our product is or our service, but the design at the end comes out so differently. Everybody's seeing it from one perspective, and it comes out so different, right? So marketing has expectations, then sales pitch it in a different way, then the engineer kind of gets a bit of the vision and then sorts it out in a certain way. So you get the picture. Everybody gets a different expectation, and the customer just wanted something very straightforward and simple. And I think that's where we get distracted, when we start comparing ourselves, when we're not very clear on who our customer is, when we are not very clear on what we're designing. And then we just try to make up for it. And then we add a lot of features and a lot of noise that, like I said, our customer didn't even need in the end. So having that clarity and starting with our minimal viable product, like I was mentioning before, like understand how to get your user from A to B. From there, as you iterate, you'll understand how to improve the experience. But it's very important to, in very simple terms, and like we talked before, breaking down your problem and understanding your product to the core, coming out with the simplest solution possible. I can guarantee that those are the ones that have the highest engagement with users, because just think about yourself on a daily basis. How many things do you put on, I'll do it tomorrow? If it takes more than 5 to 10 minutes, we put it up for tomorrow. So when we create solutions and designs or products that are engaging and that are easy to understand, they boost us as a customer. So we're more prone to using that, right? Where we're like, oh, I got this. So you want to bring that satisfaction to your customer so they keep coming back to you for solutions or for products or for your services. So from here, expanding a little bit more on the architecture, the goal of architecture is to build a sustainable solution. For it to be sustainable, we need to align expectations, because if every piece of the pipeline has different expectations, it fluctuates a lot, and that will reflect on your costs. I mean, I guess all of this we can translate down to cost management, because when I have to constantly go back and forth on information or back and forth with my product design because I didn't get it or I didn't understand, then again, that expands my timelines for production, and that increases my costs. So when approaching product design with the mind that I understand my customer, I know I understand my solution in simple terms, then I can create a very nice blueprint that will create that will align expectations for everybody in the team, especially. Like, remember that your team is made up of different profiles. So even if you give the same piece of information, your designer and your developer and your programmer, or if you're working with like more of an industrial product, everybody is going to grasp different information. So it's very important to create a pipeline that has very clear steps and an aligned outcome. Like, you want to make sure that everybody in the process understands the expectations. And again, this is just another variation of the diagram from the slide before. And this is like The customer just wants a very simple swing, and then it's like the product manager, how they imagine it, how the engineer puts it together. So you really want to make sure that to keep a sustainable, low-cost production line, everybody understands expectations. Everybody understands how the product or the desired outcome is going to look like. You want to make sure that that roadmap is clear throughout all the way and that the whole team has visibility. And once you have your roadmap, once you have your blueprint and everybody can look and see the same thing and understand the same thing, you're going to reduce your costs, you're going to optimize your production, and then you can begin with testing. I can't highlight how important it is to test from the beginning, from the minimum viable product that you have. And this will allow you to iterate at a lower cost. The image below is taken to the extreme, but I do love the approach. Like sometimes we think, oh, my solution is so obvious, I can just go straight up into the final product. But we may miss in between steps how my customer might have interpreted my solution, or if it is as simple as I think it is, right? Again, once you're in your team and you're constantly thinking of an idea, it may become very obvious to you, but make sure to test your ideas outside of your niche or your group of like-minded individuals, just to make sure that your solution doesn't create a lot of contrast, right? When we are surrounded by like-minded individuals, we feel that something is obvious, and then when we put it out in the market, it doesn't seem to be as obvious as we thought. So it is very important, again, to keep sustainable solutions, move in small steps, and that will give you the capacity to iterate. And it is always cheaper to prevent than to correct. Once you're out in the market and you've produced on a mass scale, it's way harder to do a recall and be like, yeah, we messed up on like the instructions. You know, there's so many cases that we could cover on how poor manual instructions deteriorated the release of a product, or little details like, for example, this lock, right? If it's not really that intuitive for the user is just going to put it to the side. So it's very important to hone on your proof of concept. And I do love the process of low, medium, high fidelity. Low fidelity can be post-its where you're just expanding on your idea and making sure that it's as obvious as you think it is. Medium is where you get a bit of a prototype that is a little bit more sturdy and creates that experience, so that when you go to high fidelity and you really put your product out there, you already know it works because you've done the iteration in the first stages. It's much cheaper to iterate at a low and medium cost prototype than high fidelity. So you want to make sure that you've tested your product and your design or your solution so much that by the end, you already know the result because you've already tested it, because you already have feedback from your users and your customers. So to stay sustainable, again, to kind of wrap up that idea, is very important to be very clear on expectations so that everybody in the team understands what's happening, and start testing from the beginning, because sometimes everybody says, okay, I understand. And in my experience, then we pass it on to the first person in the team, right? The designer. And then the designer came up with something that kind of threw everybody off. And then the whole pipeline of expectations was moved, if you may, by 1 degree. And by the end, when we got to the final product, it was not what we expected. So you want to make sure that you're able to iterate on each step so that, again, when you get to the high fidelity prototype, you already know the outcome because you've tested it before. And something very interesting, just from a statistical standpoint, there's been a lot of research on focus groups and user testing, and 4 to 5 users or customers will give you 80% of the feedback you need to know about your product. So I'm going to repeat that with an example. It's very funny. If you have an office that has a carpet on the outside and 4 people trip before they come into your office, do you really need to test it with 100 people to see if 80 out of 100 trip on the carpet? So again, if 1 user trips on the carpet, that's an indicator, and it can be taken, that example, into any industry. If you see customers, 4 to 5 customers having a hiccup or an inconvenience or a pain point with your solution, that is pointing you to 80% of what you're going to see when you scale up. So a lot of people focus on big groups, on big data, but I'm here to tell you 4 to 5 customers that are not related to your product, right, is not testing it with the people in the office that are already familiar with your product, is testing it with people outside of your bubble. 4 to 5 people will give you 80% of that information. So my ideal number, I usually test with 8 to 12, as random as possible, so that I can really get very cutthroat feedback. But again, you work with that 80% of feedback, and you can create amounts of changes and improvements to your product. And again, prevent rather than correct. It's always cheaper. So that's a bit of a big picture of how to approach product design, how to bring it down into implementation and architecture, and start planning for production. And I will leave this slide as some pointers for the pioneers. I guess if I could go back and give myself some advice throughout my experience when I was starting on different ventures and startups, is keep it simple. Keep it simple. And it goes back, if you can't explain it simple, you don't understand it well enough. And I know there's sophisticated answers. Trust me, I've worked in banking, I've worked with fintech, but at the end, it didn't matter, because I had a 5-minute elevator pitch to tell somebody why my solution was disruptive and was unique. So at the end, if you are able to simply put your terms, and I always use this example, explain it to your grandmother, you're on the other side. Like, if you can explain your solution to your grandmother, that's probably like the hierarchy that I like to use when it comes to solutions, because sometimes we'll tell ourselves, no, this is very sophisticated. But if we take up on that line, then it gets robust. You know, your process gets robust, and then you start taking up on information that is not necessarily adding value to your end product or to your customer. So I'll go first on the picture here, which is what I think it's so relevant right now, where we are gathering data from everywhere and anywhere. Just remember, big data is like a mine. Big data doesn't tell you anything. Big data is noise. When you process and you mine that data, then you get information, you get knowledge. So do not get distracted by big numbers, but big data. Learn how to simplify it, break it down into knowledge. And from knowledge to experience, that's the game changer. And that is where I'm saying it's very important to iterate. Some people go all in without experience, and I can tell you, experience and testing from the beginning with your product is going to give you more information than any data you want. The data will help you improve and iterate down the line. But to get started, there's nothing better than hands-on and be on the ground and connect with your customers and understand the needs, the real needs of the market. So I think this was huge. A lot of people get stuck in data, then a lot of people get stuck in knowledge, but at the end, nothing will give you as much understanding as doing it and getting that experience and iterating from experience. And that's why I find the low, medium, high fidelity prototyping is so good, because again, if I've tested in the first stages, I know what I'm going to get. I have the experience and the knowledge. So going back to that, some of the pointers that I think are very simple, but very big changers for me, is the ultimate goal is customer satisfaction. The success of a business, whether it's, you can measure it in many indicators, but I feel at the end, if your customer is satisfied and they return and they recommend you, whatever your product is, whatever your industry is, that's a game changer. That's for me the success of a real business, and that's what's going to keep you in business. Focus on sustainability rather than growth. Maybe this could be a webinar on its own, because I feel that there's a lot of noise out there, like how big is your business, how many users, how many this, but I can tell you that if it's not sustainable and you're burning $3 million in marketing a month to sustain your clients, they're not clients. They're not clients, right? Like, you want to be sustainable. And I think it's much more powerful to have a small user base that creates an income and gives you resources to keep investing in your business than burning out a lot of money in marketing just to give the illusion that you're holding on to your customers. Like, I've been in businesses where they're like, we can't cut our marketing budget because then we'll lose clients. And I was like, then that's not a client. A real client comes back to you whether you're doing marketing or not. So again, it's that distraction where we think the success is in how big my company is, but I believe it comes down to the numbers. Your business is as successful as how sustainable it is. If every month you're making more money than you're putting into your business, then that's sustainable. And from my perspective and from a sustainable standpoint, less customers that actually give you money and not cost you marketing is much more sustainable, and then it'll grow organically. It may take a little bit longer to expand, but it's going to be sustainable. So it's not going to burn through your pockets. So that's very important. I think that's really big thing to focus on, because in a lot of industries and experiences, I've seen companies be like, oh, but we have 3 million users. And I'm like, yeah, but your marketing budget is 3 times as big, because you need to hold them, because maybe your product is not as strong. Maybe your solution is not as clear, and that's why you need so much marketing. So again, that's just like one perspective from a very sustainable, risk-averse person, right? So yeah, and then keep it viable. Just to hone on that is keep it super simple, small steps, modular, so that you can put in, put out, try out, test, and like you're not all fully invested and committed in one big chunk of a solution that if it doesn't work, it all goes down. So make sure that you keep it modular and small steps so that you can build up on it a little bit more like Lego. It will give you a lot more flexibility moving forwards, and also when expanding your team and delegating resources, and it'll just make it way simpler. And here, going back to when I was talking about information, on the fourth point is mind the noise. Avoid distractions from your solution and avoid investing too much before you test. I've seen people that go with a hunch and they're like, this solution is going to work. They invest a bunch, they don't test, and then they go out on the market and they're like, oh, the customer didn't get my product. And I think maybe you didn't do your homework and understand your user or your customer and provide them with an easy, simple solution that they can actually pick up on. Right? And distractions from your solution, that includes the data, right? The big data that it seems so intimidating, but again, unless you mine it and you put it into action, it doesn't say much. It's just pointing at trends, but trends are not necessarily money makers. Money makers are good solutions, good sustainable solutions that your customers like and that they refer you to others. So again, distractions are big data, what your competitors are doing, what you should be doing. Like if you're confident that you're providing a solution to your customer from A to B, stick to that, work and be the best at providing that solution in the way that you only can. And that's why I was honing at the beginning in this design. When you design your product, really understand your customer. If you understand your customer, you understand your niche, and you know what you're offering, you will be able to cancel out a lot of the noise. Here, just like a side tab, in one of the companies that I worked with, they had an amazing product idea. Nevertheless, they started getting intimidated and distracted by competitors, and they tried to add features from all of their competitors. Like whatever their competitor was doing that seemed successful, they started to implement that, and they ended up with what we called like an elephant of a product that did everything but nothing. And it was just 2 years of getting distracted from their main solution because everybody else was doing something else, right? And the data says, but at the end, we forgot about the user. And that was a very, very interesting big lesson, because on the outside, the product was super attractive for investors and VCs, but the users and the customers were actually not engaging as much as when it was just a simple oriented solution. So mind the noise and always leave time to iterate and innovate. If you want to be a pioneer, if you're starting up, if you're an entrepreneur, that's a lifestyle. You're always in the tip of technology, right? It's not just like I create something and then I just get distracted with features. Like you really have to put time to innovate and make sure that you are pioneering into your solution so that you stay unique and you can differentiate yourself from copycats, because that's going to happen. If you become very successful, a lot of people are going to try to imitate what you're doing. So if you're very clear on what your goal is and you constantly iterate on yourself, nobody's going to be able to pick up on you, right? They're going to be able to copy you, but they're not going to be able to keep up with how you're innovating and iterating over and over your own solution. So that's awesome and that's powerful. And that's why focus is so important. And the bottom line is you can only change what you measure, right? Whenever it's very important to have indicators. And that's why I was saying, measure how simple it is, your design or your solution, how much your users engage with you, so that you can really iterate on that. Like you need markers to know if you're improving or not. And just like I started, I'll finish. I believe the most important indicator is customer satisfaction. If you have a way to measure how satisfied your customers are and iterate on that within a clear solution, that's almost an unbreakable formula for a successful business, right? There's a big part on the implementation, but a successful business will always stay in business if they have satisfied customers. So I think that's how I would wrap up the importance of product design, understanding your solutions, and developing a good blueprint and architecture to keep your process and your business sustainable.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. I want to reiterate, customer satisfaction is the ultimate goal. I was a project management professional in my former life for many years. And in project management, people talk about on time, on budget. Uh, and these are the things that make a successful project. And every time someone said that, I said, that's bull crap. And they all look at me and it's like, but here's what matters. If the person signing the check has a smile on his face and he'll call you back because they're happy, you've done a good job. This other stuff doesn't matter. If it's twice the budget, twice as long, and the person's happy because you delivered what they wanted, they're going to call you again. So what really matters?
I love that.
So
I love that. A smile on their face. That's the key. Exactly. Exactly.
So I've got a few questions here. They're coming in pretty good. Put your questions in the chat room on Zoom or in the YouTube here. My first question from YouTube is, can one take it that an outcome of an industry customer survey from an industry gatekeeper could be taken as what customers in that industry wants? And if not, what would you suggest?
So let me just reframe to see if I got it. Like an industry gatekeeper, they do surveys and research. Can we rely on that?
Yes.
Okay, I think it's important. I think it's a bit of a funnel, right? Like you can start in the surface and definitely rely on the experts or the gatekeepers that have access to the information and use it as pointers. They may be pointing you the main pain points of what your customers may be looking for. Nevertheless, never hesitate to actually go out and, as a metaphor, go out on the streets one on one. Like also, you also want to validate that information, right? Like sometimes the noise and the big data is good to draw a ballpark. So that's always handy. Just make sure that you don't get drowned in a lot of anonymous information and numbers. Like sometimes you do want to put a face and a name to that customer. Like I was saying, sometimes 4 to 5 may give you a stronger indicator. So do use gatekeepers in the industry. They will point to you at the main pain points. And then from there, never hesitate to do your own research and hands-on gathering experience. Even if it's small talk with people around you, you'll get a very interesting insight on how people actually feel in the real world.
Great suggestions. So let me go back. My first question here is good design international, language, and culturally independent? For example, if a website or UI design works in one country or culture, can you assume it'll work in others when you expanding internationally?
Awesome. So I think I would break that in two parts. There is the visual part of it that like the graphics or the more archetypal aspect, right? Like we all operate under the same emotional spectrum, whether we're here or in the other side of the globe. So there is that more archaeological, archetypal part of us that we understand where something is hot, it burns. Like there's some obvious parts of the experience that are internationally accepted, right? Like big font, right? If you have small font in one culture and another, it won't. Like, for example, what I'm trying to say is like when it comes to graphic design, there's certain worldwide rules. Like big font is always better, less text is always better, less steps is always better. When it comes to cultures, what I found the biggest obstacle sometimes is the language. So you just want to make sure that you're using the right terms, whereas in one culture that word may not mean the same or have the same context or the same impact. But when it comes to it, if you have a clean, clear design, I would basically say all you have to change is the language or the words, right? Even in Latin America, for example, there's the same application, but within countries, they just change the way they tell you subscribe or follow. Like it's just a little bit of the language that could be adjusted, but a good design should be understood across cultures. So that's why you want to keep it simple, because sometimes we justify and we say, no, this is a cultural thing. Unless it's like very curated niche for a particular culture, I think the higher level you keep your design, it should be understood by anybody at a visual level. When it comes to the language, feel free to kind of hone into that and kind of curate a bit more, if that makes sense.
It does. Another question here from our someone on Zoom. How do you clarify what customers need? Sometimes they may not articulate what they actually need. They may say A, but actually mean B.
And that is very important. And that's where the homework of a good designer or a good architect is. So the bottom line is understanding the pain point. They may not be able to articulate in a solution oriented way or give you instructions of what they need, but there's where we do the homework of understanding the pain point, right? I understand the pain point of people having a car stuck in their garage and not being able to make a side income. And I understand the pain point of somebody wanting to go somewhere, but they don't want to drive. So they might have not articulated, oh, I need a platform or an app that does this. But if you're good at observing your client and observing, what I'm trying to say is you frame the right questions to get them to tell you what is it that they need. They may not articulate it in a like in an intellectual way where you can just like you have to play the detective. This is what I'm trying to say. Like you have to figure out from the pain point, start asking the right questions and you'll get the right answers. So you're right, customers sometimes don't know what they need, but that's where we experts in the industry come in, right? And we're like, okay, I'm seeing a pain point here, I'm seeing a problem in this industrial process. And that's where you also hone in with a solution. And you're like, let me see if I'm understanding. I love this approach when it comes to consulting. You reframe, let me see if I understand correctly. You're in A and you would like to go to B. Yes. And it's your homework to build that bridge. The user will not come to tell you how to build that bridge. That's our homework as consultants, to fill in the gap. But I do think as long as you understand where they're at and what their desired state is, you fill in that gap with what they need. But that's like the cool thing about the architect. They may not know how it works, but that's where we come in to fill in that gap and get them to be.
Here's a very specific question that you may or may not have an answer to from someone on YouTube. What platform or solution can you advise that gives persona information on the Canadian customers based on any given industry?
Wow.
Yeah, I
Wow.
know.
That is very rich, and I mean it could be very technical as a particular platform, but specifically, well, my background and I was trained and I studied in Canada, and Canada is a fascinating market because it's as diverse as you want it to be, right? You could niche as much as you want into a culture within Canada, or like niche in or out, and have like such a diverse culture. So when it comes to Canada, this may be a little bit broad, but just for the practicality of offering a platform, social media. Honestly, if you know how to use platforms, your audience is already in the main social media platforms. So if you know how to curate answers and create surveys, again, it all comes down to we have to make our homework first. I have to understand what is it that I want to understand. I have to create the right questions. But you'll go on social media platforms and you can look at trends and something. For example, if you don't want to actively engage with people, you just follow trends and hashtags. Like do your research, see what hashtags are being more predominant in Canada, and you can zone in by regions, right? So you can be like, okay, in this region, people are searching for this or searching for that. So you could do it open-ended where you go in and you're like, what are people Googling more or hashtagging more? Or you can go into a niche and be like, okay, within the industry of health and wellness, what are the main things that people are looking for? So when it comes to Canada, you're lucky because a lot of people are connected to the internet. So you can read trends from so many angles. You can go on Amazon and see trending products and books to see what people are trying to educate themselves on. You can go on Google and see what type of courses or self-teaching right now is very prominent, right? So you can start understanding your audience's psychology by understanding what they're searching for, what they're going for, what platforms are they engaging, like the data is out there. It's a matter of being clear within ourselves. And that's where I find it's the trickiest. We always focus on the outside, but we may not be very sure what are we actually looking for. Because when we are very clear on what we want to understand, from starters, to keep it simple, all platforms and social media will give you the trends. So to get like a general basis, again, when it comes to Canada, if you want to understand that particular culture, then you can zone in on that as well. It's just like I every day I'm mind blown by the capacity of social media platforms to filter audiences. Like you can filter by the culture, by the age, by preferences in so many ways. So I think to keep it simple and just take some pointers, I would start there. As you go in, you may find other more curated services and platforms, but I'm always in for freebies. Like I always try to find the way to approach things in, okay, social media platforms, the information is already there. It really puts to the test if I know what I'm looking for. Because sometimes we distract ourselves by hiring services that are going to sort things out for us, but we don't really know what is it that we want to solve.
Our next question here from Zoom. What is the best way to interact with your users for talking about feedback, features, etc.?
I think it's a little bit like any type of relationship, right? You have to create a bit of a rapport. And initially, it all depends on your type of solution, right? But if I think chats are always very handy, live chats or chat bots that make the user feel that you're there, even if it's automized. For example, in one of the companies that I worked with, our capacity was so small, but we had an automatic bot that always said, we'll be back with you in 24 hours. How do you want to be reached out? Through text, through email, or through chat? And that's where it gets very tricky because we found many different preferences. There's people that are like phone call averse. They just want, through email. So to keep it simple, again, I think having some availability where your customer or your client can reach you whenever they need you, showing that availability, not necessarily me spamming you with emails like give me your feedback, but more like I'm there when you need me. So I think chatbots are very handy, and always, of course, providing that line of customer service. Whenever you have a new client, drop a line, whether it's, I don't know what's your mean, right? Because right now it could be text or email or through your website or app, but make it very obvious how the client can reach you out if they have a pain point, right? Whether it's, and then you start creating that report, and then you start picking up on the ones that do respond to you, and then you take advantage of that. But I think first move is on your end, making sure that they know how to find you when they need your support. And on a more practical, scalable basis, I think surveys are very good, but keep them under a minute. Like if you go beyond 5 questions, then you should be paying your users. So keep it simple and friendly and bits and bytes. And really, here's where you have to prioritize what you want to know, right? But for example, there's companies that I've worked with where they paid me $100 for a Zoom call where I would give them feedback. And I was like, yes, of course. Or, if you want a little bit more than 5 minutes of your user, give them something in exchange so that they feel that they're collaborating and being heard and they're part of your experience. So I think that's very cool when companies do that.
Yeah, and I think instead of relying on someone else's survey, do your own. And the best thing to do is actually talk to them if you can get them on the phone or video chat or whatever, because in a survey you get some feedback, but you don't get that qualitative, that heavy sigh, that hesitation, that facial expression where there's more there that you want to dig deeper on, or you miss something. So if you can do it, you can get such better feedback, verbally or visually.
I love that. Even like I was trying to keep it generic because I don't know where some of our viewers are or what type of industry, but honestly, like I would do, no matter the position in the company, like even if you're the CEO, once a week you talk to one customer. You take the time to book a call of 1 hour where you're gonna return value to your customer, and you're gonna listen to one customer a week. I think that's beautiful because yes, you can do 10 surveys that they're impersonal, people responded on the go, but having that one-on-one and being like, I'm here giving you a face and a name, and I want to understand your experience, and I want to solve your problems. I think that's priceless. And again, I think one call with a person could give you more data than 20 surveys. I would agree. I love that.
And here's a little hack for people, just because you're here. What I often recommend is do a conference yourself for your industry. Start calling people up. You get past gatekeepers because you say, hey, I'm running the, I don't know, airline luggage conference, and I want to talk to stewardesses and pilots who handle the most luggage, talk about problems in the industry, what's working and what isn't. I'm looking for speakers. I'm looking for panelists. Book a room 6 months out. You get to talk to people. You get to figure out what the questions are. All those people that you've reached out to, and getting that person, 100 people in the room, they're your potential clients. And guess what? You're now positioned to solve their problem because they're talking about the problems in the industry, what needs to be solved. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
Exactly, like masterminds, right? Like you're serving them, but at the same time, they're just feeding in the loop. Yeah, yeah,
Ab-
exactly.
Absolutely. And people are more than happy to talk to you if you're giving them something, speaker opportunities, podcast interviews, that kind of stuff. It's not just all about you. So that's just some advice. So for founders new to Canada or here, say on the start of visa program, are there specific design or architectural considerations or testing you should be doing when launching in Canada?
Mm, I think it's like I was saying, the Canadian market, I think it really tests the good designers, or it is a very good school for designers when because it's multicultural, right? So we don't get to crutch on cultural slangs or cultural design things where like, oh, in certain cultures, there's things that are like almost implicit. So Canada, it's really, I think, an amazing, beautiful, neutral ground where you get, for me, minimalism goes a long way. Making it as neutral. You want to have as broad as a user base as you can, right? And I think that's the key. Like simplicity is to get to a simple place. It's complicated. It's not straightforward. I think it does take a lot of iterations and to become an expert in your niche to keep things simple. And that's what makes experts good, that they can take very sophisticated things and explain them to you in a pitch, in an elevator pitch. So the bottom line when it comes to Canada, iterate as much as you need on post-its and with friends and with brainstorming sessions to keep it as minimalist as possible. I would even say, and this is where I was talking about distractions, forget about the multicolor palettes, the features, the movements, and the animations. Keep it simple, black, white. If you need red or green to indicate yeses or nos, and go from there. I've rarely seen people complain like there's not enough colors in the platform, right? It's like if it takes me from A to B and it solves my my problem, that's all really you need. So again, when it comes to Canada, it's an amazing ground. Keep it as simple as possible so that you give the benefit of the doubt to anybody, right? So again, it's minimalism and just super simple. So it does take, like I said, a lot of iterations. You'll be surprised how you simplify a product when you work on it for 1, 2, or 3 years. So I think that's the key. Iterate in-house so that you come out with something so simple that people are like, oh, I could have done this. And it's like, yeah, you think.
Yeah, I think it was Hemingway who said, if I had more time, I'd write a shorter sentence. And it takes time to simplify things down to the level that it sounds easy. It sounds like, oh, but that's not, it doesn't start that way.
Exactly. So I think that's Canada to you. That's that niche that you're dealing with because people come from so many different backgrounds, right? And I experienced it in teamworks where I would say, okay, we have this problem. I want everybody in the team to come up with a solution. And we all came with valid solutions, but they were culturally biased in ways where I was just like, people didn't understand necessarily my Hispanic references or Asian references. So it really took the whole team to brainstorm and be able to clear out as much as we could from our predisposition.
Hope you cut out there. Hopefully it's me and not you, maybe. Um,
Fascinating. And for me, it would be simple and clear. It goes a long way.
Agreed. Um, we got another question here, and you'll have to elaborate any way you can if you can. Is there a real-time co-creating product platform that you're aware of?
Yeah. I Figma. I don't know. I guess I was hesitant, but yeah, we can say Figma. I find it amazing. I've used a lot of platforms. I mean, I guess I'm going to drop some cues there because it depends what you're working on, right? But Figma, I find it so easy for the onboarding. It's relatively simple. Platforms nowadays are getting so complex and so sophisticated that I'm just like, I just need this as a tool. I don't want to become an expert on this, right? So I find Figma makes the real-time engagement super easy and also to deliver prototype solutions with customers. Like you have features where you can share it with collaborators, with clients, just they can just see, they can edit. Like it gives you that availability. And honestly, it's a whiteboard. So you can go as far as your imagination. Like you can design, like I said, even products or blueprints for physical industries. Like if you're doing like a plant for, I don't know, whatever product development, or if you're doing like technical digital stuff. So I think Figma is super handy on that. And you'll be surprised of all the products and services that I've used across companies. People always keep coming down to Google Docs, when it comes to like slides and sharing presentations or Excel spreadsheets, just for consistency. So long story short, when it comes to product design, I think Figma is great. And it could actually fulfill most of your needs if you get creative, because you can create spreadsheets and consistent highlight changes and whatnot. So I think that's my go-to.
I got one more question here. Many founders are also introverts, and they're afraid to show anyone a product that they don't consider perfect. What is your message to them about when they should be showing potential clients what they're working on?
Well, I could definitely that set up the stage for a joke, because I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I can relate to that question. And extremely introvert, believe it or not. So I hear you. I think. I think I'm still sharing my screen. I'll bring it down to this. Right? Make your low fidelity prototypes very obvious that they're low. So if you were even to go to a client with this, they understand it's not your final product. So to answer that question, if it's like a very big serious client that you've told that you're a professional in the industry, you're going to have to do a lot of in-house work. But also if you're very upfront with them and you're like, hey, I like to iterate a lot through every stage, and I want to make sure that we are aligned in expectations. And again, a little bit, I'm going to collage here a little bit of ideas. I hope I don't make anybody dizzy, but it's this concept. You want to walk with your client through every stage of the process to make sure you don't end up doing something they didn't need. And there's no shame in going through iterations. The most important part here is how you present yourself and you explain expectations. Hey, this is a low fidelity prototype that we want to test, because if it's approved, we're going to iterate into a medium fidelity prototype. Right. And that also helps the introvert and this aim for perfection, because when you break it down in steps and you open up the process and you admit that you're in the process of a masterpiece, it lowers expectations for everybody. Whereas if I tell you, I'll have something for you in a month, that's 1 month of building expectations where you're going to have to come up with this final one. And if they don't like it, that's a lot of correction and that's going to be costly. So I do feel that within the industry, if we are able to be more transparent and upfront with our processes and be like, hey, we're all innovating here, but if we innovate and iterate together, we're going to have to correct way less down the line. So I do think that lower down the expectations. Do not be afraid to iterate and come to your client. I think clients do appreciate a lot of the transparency and seeing what you're doing for them. Sometimes they take for granted, like, you've been out for a month, so I have high expectations. But if every week you send me, a one pager with some shots of like your low fidelity prototype, I give you some feedback and you take me along with you, I will be way more understanding when it's not perfect than if you just work as a black box. So I think as an introvert, it's an experience, but put yourself out there in small bites and it's much more manageable than building expectations for the final launch product. A great question though.
Great advice. Thank you very much for your time. If people want to know more about you, maybe hire you or follow you on social media, where do they go?
LinkedIn. If that works for everybody, I try to keep it simple without too many links, too many platforms, narrow down the attention span. So hopefully if you guys have a LinkedIn, feel free, you can search my name, Carolina Pradilla. Send me a message and I'm always more than happy to jump on a discovery call or explore ideas in which I can provide feedback, collaborate. I'm always happy to explore ideas and chat more with driven, like-minded individuals. So do not feel introvert or hesitant to connect. I'm always happy.
Thank you again, Carolina, for taking the time to talk about product design and share a bunch of your insights. It was really fantastic.
Hey, thank you so much, everybody, for your time, your attention, and yeah, thank you so much for the space. It was awesome.